Yeah! What's good, YouTube? It's your boy Koolaidpapi, aka Big Cap, aka the sexy dark skin screamer, aka I don't gotta say no more. And today we gonna check out the greatest escape in history. Let's figure out what the greatest escape in history is about.
This is
And who escaped, where they escaped from.
Constructed over the course of 2 years between 1942 and 1944 in the dense forests of Sagan, 145 kilometers southeast of Berlin, it became one of the largest prisoner of war camps of its kind in Europe. Designed specifically for the officers of Allied air crews shot down over Axis-occupied territories, this sprawling high-security complex, which comprised 5 separate compounds, would house between 10 to 12,000 prisoners at its peak. But what it's really famous for is not what you see above ground, but what you're not seeing below it. The secret subterranean tunnel that facilitated the greatest escape in history.
Shit, that tunnel look OD.
But before we get into the story behind it, I'd like to thank this video's sponsor, Call of War. Call of War is a
as
far as prison camps were concerned, Stalag Luft 3 was a relatively comfortable place to be holed up. Due to their status as officers, prisoners were afforded significant privileges over the average conscript. The northern compound, the site of the escape, boasted a well-stocked library, a swimming pool, a sports field, and a makeshift theatre, which occasionally hosted movies and live music.
At least they gave him a pool,
the fact
library,
that the camp was operated by the Luftwaffe,
schoolyard.
the German Air Force, meant that there was also a degree of respect and camaraderie between captors and captives. Of course, such positives did little to dissuade prisoners from wanting to escape.
Right.
They could never know how long they'd remain captive, how long the war would drag on, or what the outcome would be. To sit idly by and accept their imprisonment would be like consigning themselves to a limbo of uncertainty where they had no autonomy and no purpose.
Right.
So they would make escaping their purpose. Not only did it give them something to occupy themselves and allow them to defy their captors, but it aligned with their sense of duty to the Allied war effort.
Okay.
Any escape attempt that forced the Germans to allocate more manpower and equipment to prevent a prison break or conduct a manhunt drew vital resources away from the Axis front lines and damaged their war machine. There was just one problem.
The prison was said
to be escape-proof. The compound was surrounded by a set of fences spaced 1.5 meters apart, their tops bristling with barbed wire. Between them lay even more. Even getting to the fences was difficult. If someone stepped over a nearby warning wire while approaching them, they'd be shot on sight. If by some miracle you were able to climb over or cut through them without disemboweling yourself, you'd have to cross another 30 or so meters of no man's land before you reached the sanctuary of the tree line. This was all the while hoping that the guards stationed in the camp's towers went spontaneously blind and became hard of hearing, because if you were spotted, there was nothing to shield you from the machine gun fire.
Oh, it's not going fast.
Okay, so brute forcing an escape over the
Hitler
fence
had his shit
work.
timed out perfect.
Fine, just dig a tunnel. The Germans supposedly had that.
I'm not saying Hitler's a great guy. He's a terrible guy. You know, don't try to mix my words up. Don't try to do that.
Covered.
Hey, I just got on. Please don't cancel me before I even. You know what I'm saying? I just got on, bro. Please.
Every hut was built a few inches off the ground to make it harder for inmates to hide their
I ain't even on yet.
beneath the buildings.
Don't cancel me before I even.
In addition, the compound had been built on a sandy, silt-like soil that was extremely difficult to tunnel through without causing a collapse. Finally, sensitive microphones were placed underground all around the perimeter of the camp to detect the sound of tunneling.
That's what I'm saying.
How
like
did they do it?
These is real crazy psychopaths. They is thinking about killing way too hard. Yeah, so if they escape, we have 3 barbed wire fences where if they go through the barbed wire fences, we got a whole bunch of open land where we could just shoot their ass and then bury them underground. And then if they try to dig through, they'll just fall. The whole sand will just fall on top of them and they'll die and suffocate. Like, yo, these niggas really thought this through. How long? Like, bro.
How did the prisoners of Stalag Luft 3 build not just any tunnel, but a tunnel that could bypass all of these security precautions?
Like
for this massive undertaking, the prisoners of the North Compound established one of the most sophisticated and organized escape industrial complexes ever conceived. Over the course of more than a year between April of 1943 and March of 1944, a group of around 600 American, British, and other European prisoners would furnish materials for and construct 3 separate tunnels beneath the compound,
Tom, Dick, and Harry,
hoping that if the Germans found one or two, they would not think to look for a third. To avoid detection in the first place, these tunnels would be disguised with inconspicuous pieces.
Is that why they say you gonna hang out with Tom, Dick, and Harry?
The main tunnel we'll be focusing on, nicknamed
nowadays,
Harry, was hidden under a metal cooking stove that had been placed over a wooden trapdoor. Each tunnel would be built roughly 7.6 meters underground as to avoid microphones picking up the sound of digging. To prevent any tunnel collapses at this depth, they would need to be reinforced with support beams, which of course was a bit of a problem.
I was about to say, how do they get those?
It was nearly impossible to smuggle materials into the camp, especially
somebody
not
had
on
to
the
help
scale
them.
required
Somebody
for
was helping
construction.
On the inside.
The solution to this was to get the Germans to unwittingly provide prisoners with the very materials needed for their escape. Items such as bedboards, chairs, tables, and benches would mysteriously disappear or be reported as defective. The Germans were encouraged by neutral third-party inspectors, such as the Red Cross and the Swiss, to provide a minimum standard of living for inmates. So they would often replace these items when they went missing.
Minimum standard.
Providing a steady stream.
But they didn't do that for the
slaves.
Goods.
Naturally, the heavy rate of turnover for certain items was a point of confusion for the Stalag administration. The camp's commander, Colonel Friedrich von Lindeiner, noted that, quote, "The material required by the camp amounts to 5 times the amount which would be used for German troops using the same accommodation." Of course, the occupants of Wehrmacht facilities weren't fashioning their bedboards into support columns and stealing screws from light fittings to affix table legs to makeshift rails. That's right, rails. To speed up the digging process, the inmates would construct a rail and cart system that stretched along the entirety of the tunnel, shuttling tools, materials, and people towards one end and sand back to the other. That was another problem, though. The sand.
These boys are smart.
Digging a tunnel required displacing a lot of it, and it couldn't simply be piled up outside of one of the huts, because that would immediately
They had too much time on their hands. That's what it was.
To make it worse, the sand below ground
was too much time on their hands.
The sand above was grey.
They have no electronics. Them niggas was just thinking all the time.
100 men known as penguins
would store
sand in bags.
How can I kill niggas? That's all they thinking about.
And covertly
How can I kill
release it
niggas?
in the camp's courtyard, kicking it as they did so to blend it with the grey topsoil. In the process, they looked a bit like penguins. To further ensure the project wouldn't be discovered, the inmates employed a constantly rotating roster of watchmen that would alert the tunnelers to approaching guards, allowing them to cover up tunnels before any inspection. This was just as well, since the camp employed specialist anti-escape personnel known as ferrets, whose sole purpose was to sniff out any tunnels and spy on the prisoners.
Well, clearly these ferrets
were only ever
effective.
one misstep away from discovery and utter failure.
These ferrets
to
weren't
punctuate
good.
that point, one of the 3 tunnels being worked on by the name of Tom was discovered by ferrets amidst heightened vigilance in September of 1943. Unfortunately, following this discovery, the American prisoners in the northern compound were relocated, as it was deemed that the Brits and the Yanks were getting along far too well with each other. After this incident, a decision was made to
like each other a little too much
onto Tunnel Harry so that it might be ready for an escape attempt when the weather improved.
Abandoned Tom used dick for storage.
In the meantime, a detachment of the involved inmates busied themselves with the creation of escape kits containing everything a prisoner would need once.
Prisoners were allowed to operate workshops to repair clothing, furniture, etc. In secret, they forged escape kits for items they could not easily be hidden underground. Workshops were used in the tunnels themselves. Wow.
Pound. This included civilian clothes, compasses, forged identity papers, and maps. The materials required for the creation of these items were often procured
1940s, these boys are doing that, mind you.
Sympathetic camp personnel who might be convinced to part ways with some pens, papers, magnets, cloth, and cash in exchange for some chocolate and coffee. After months of careful preparation, the tunnel, which had grown to a length of 111 meters, was deemed ready. The prisoners of Stalag Luft 3's northern compound would carry out their escape on the night of the 24th of March, 1944.
I feel bad for the mother niggas that still stuck up
prisoners
in there.
Set to make the attempt, but only those determined to have the best chance of remaining undetected would go first. 30 men, fluent in German, would be given what little money had been accumulated, as well as a head start to try and make it to the nearby Sagan train station before the last train left for the night. Most of the remaining prisoners would have to travel by foot. Each individual had separate travel plans, but most hoped to reach Allied territory via neutral countries. The mood in the compound
by foot,
was tense.
like, yo, there's no way.
The movement of each guard was being tracked.
Even getting out of there is bleak.
And each man made his preparations for the long road ahead. At roughly 8:45 that evening, a number of prisoners took up positions at various points inside the tunnel. Lying in cramped conditions, they would pull escapees up along the rails. At around 9:30, one of the men began removing the boards, obscuring the entrance to the escape shaft at the end of the tunnel. But they were waterlogged and jammed. It took until 10:15 to finally wrench them loose. This was a significant delay. Night fell around 9 p.m. and the sun came up at 5:30 in the morning. They had just wasted 45 minutes of darkness just trying to get the exit open. To make matters worse,
I'm
the
actually
escape
nervous for these
hatch,
niggas.
which had been planned to come out within the tree line, was actually a few meters into
Before, yeah.
Despite this setback, the inmates resolved to continue with their escape
shit.
anyway. They'd just have to be more careful to avoid the German sentries that regularly patrolled the perimeter of the compound. With this in mind, they placed a watchman at the edge of the tree line, hidden in a spying nest set up by the Germans to surveil the camp from a distance.
Them Germans smart.
This person would periodically tug a rope that led into the exit hatch to signal an all clear. From 10:30 onwards, a steady stream of men made their way through the tunnel, slipping out into the darkness of the night between the gaps in the patrols. Over the course of the next 6 hours, 76 men escaped Stalag Luft 3.
I had 200.
But at 4:55 a.m., just over half an hour before dawn's first light, disaster struck.
Oh, fuck.
One of the escapees misinterpreted a rope tug to mean that he was clear to emerge from the tunnel.
It was the wind.
When he did, he came up right in front of one of the patrolling sentries, who after an initial shock collected himself, fired a warning shot, blew his whistle, and detained the man at gunpoint. The escape had been busted.
Fuck. So what are they gonna do now?
Unfortunately, most of the men that had successfully escaped Stalag Luft 3 that fateful evening would end up being captured.
Fuck.
Some even before they'd left the town of Sagan.
So
A nationwide search involving 60 to 70,000 Wehrmacht troops and Gestapo personnel was launched, making it almost impossible to travel through Germany undetected. The tunnel's discovery had doomed them. Ultimately, only 3 of the 76 men would evade capture entirely. 2 Norwegians, who managed to sneak their way to neutral Sweden via Stettin, and 1 Dutchman, who linked up with resistance forces in the Netherlands before travelling discreetly to the Spanish border and then Gibraltar. The vast majority of the other escapees were not so lucky. Over the course of the next few months, they would virtually vanish off the face of the earth, only to turn up back in the town of Sagan in burial urns, as nothing more than ash. Until the end of the war, no one knew for sure what had happened to them. A Royal Air Force investigation conducted following Germany's surrender found that 50 of the 73 recaptured prisoners had been shot in roadside summary executions. That is to say, illegally. Interviews conducted with the Gestapo personnel present for these executions show that the escapees were informed that they were to be returned to Stalag Luft 3. In transit, they would be invited to leave the car to, quote, relieve themselves at the side of the road. Once the handcuffed prisoners began to do so, his captors would shoot him in the back of the head, at which point he would fall into the ditch in front of him.
And just leave him there.
Truly undignified death. The scenery and the weaponry changed, but the methods rarely did. Most would be executed in this fashion. It helped the Gestapo construct the myth that the prisoners had been killed while trying to escape. But ultimately, this did little to conceal their true actions. A Swiss inspector at Stalag Luft 3 was immediately suspicious of the explanation and reported his findings to the British government. Many of the Gestapo men responsible for the extrajudicial killings of these POWs would be judged guilty of war crimes and sentenced to harsh prison sentences or death at the Nuremberg trials. While the flight from Stalag Luft 3 may not have been the largest by numbers prison escape during World War II, it was certainly the most impressive given the obstacles faced, the complexity of the planning, and the resulting
I'm like speechless. You see,
prisoners of that camp had set out to escape, die trying, or inconvenience the Germans to such a degree that it would affect the war effort. It's safe to say they succeeded. For a month, they occupied tens of thousands of German troops and led them on a wild goose chase, diverting resources that would have been more effectively used in the fight against the Allies. The Stalag Luft 3 escape did not end well. It ended in a war crime born of the want to dissuade others from following in its footsteps. Escape is no longer a sport, echoed like a shrill tempest through every camp.
50 out of the 73 were shot.
Escape at your own peril was the Nazi message.
What happened to the other 23?
The threat didn't work. It never would have. Almost as soon as the remaining Stalag Luft 3 prisoners were informed of the deaths of their comrades, they began yet another tunnel in a bid to escape. The desire for freedom overrode even the strongest instincts.
Tunnel George straight to the grave. That's a great graphic. That is a crazy graphic. Wow.
Thanks again to Call of War for sponsoring it.
Wait, what? The feds did what? Wait a damn minute. Yeah, we gonna, hey. We gonna watch that later. Best believe we can watch that in the next video. But hey, if you're new here, click the subscribe button, click the like button. History is fucked up and it's dark. Yeah, there's not really much I can say after that. It's dark and it's fucked up. But still, click that like button, click the subscribe button, and stay for a while. Click the next video is gonna be right there. So enjoy that. And I appreciate you for fucking with me. Appreciate you for rocking with me. And let's get to 800 subscribers. 800 subscribers on the way. Yes, God. Yeah.